All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final module of the class. Today, we're going to talk about conservation officers and their role in Homeland Security. So since 9/11, the role of local law enforcement officers in Homeland Security and terrorism prevention has changed dramatically. Um, Prior to 9/11, maybe in some of the larger urban areas, there was some discussion of terrorism, but there wasn't kind of this overarching discussion of Homeland Security and terrorism, especially at the local level in places outside of those urban centers. Since then, the role and expectations of local law enforcement as part of Homeland Security and terrorism has really changed. Many of these efforts still is focused on population centers and other urban areas because those are the most likely places to be attacked. But most of the United States is not urban. About 95% of the United States is considered to be rural. Um, so overall, the amount of resources and things like that are much lower in rural areas than they are in urban areas. So kind of the question is, do they, and again, a lot of the focus, even in the rural areas, is on municipal police departments, sheriff's offices, those sorts of things. So should conservation officers have a role in Homeland Security? And if so, what is it? And their role has increased some since 9/11, not only regarding Homeland Security and terrorism, but as we've talked about, previously in this class, to a more kind of general police role in several places. So kind of currently, conservation officers assist to a certain degree in Homeland Security. And again, and this is not across the board. Certain places, conservation officers assist more than in other places. So those on the coasts and main waterways engage in Homeland Security practices more so than officers in other parts of the country because they have these important waterways that they patrol. And oftentimes those are in conjunction with agencies like the Coast Guard or other local agencies that also patrol those waterways. Conservation officers also are involved by reporting incidents that they believe may be of concern. But kind of by and large, conservation officers and agencies have not really been included in a lot of the 9/11 training programs and initiatives. There were some in the NIMS program that I had to go through when I was an officer. So there is some training that is going on. But by and large, the focus has been on municipal police agencies and those in the urbans. But if you think about it, conservation officers may be uniquely suited to assist in Homeland Security preparedness, even though they're in rural areas. So if you think about how conservation officers do their job, they're very familiar oftentimes with their local communities and are well known among the citizens within their assignment. And because of these relationships, they may really be important sources of information for Homeland Security professionals. So there's a lot of different ways that conservation officers may become aware of Homeland Security related issues, either through general patrol, where maybe they see things that are out of place, or there are times where citizens are more comfortable talking to conservation officers because these relationships that they've formed than they are with other police departments. And I've found that to be true during my time as an officer. There were times that people would come to me with issues that they wanted to report, but they weren't comfortable going to the sheriff's office. They weren't comfortable going to city police. So they would come to me, and then I would kind of serve as this go-between and kind of relay information. So they are, more or less just kind of this additional set of eyes and ears covering areas that aren't really thought about, as far as Homeland Security related. So when you think about it, yeah, are they more likely to attack urban areas? Of course. But if you're planning something, if you're trying to undergo some training, things like that, are you going to do it where there's a lot of focus on it, or are you going to do those things in places where there may not be as much focus? So that's why these rural areas really need to be thought about when it comes to Homeland Security. Another way that conservation officers or agents may be involved is this emergence of biological terrorism threats. And that may be a type of terrorism that conservation officers are uniquely able to address, provide intelligence. So they could, it could be things like germs, it could be viruses, toxins, or invasive biological species. Um, Introducing invasive species to certain environments is kind of this emerging type of bioterrorism threat, and it could be flora, it could be fauna, but it can cause irreparable harm. How often have you heard about some invasive beetle that's causing problems? Or think about the pythons in the Everglades. Now, that's obviously not bioterrorism, but invasive species can cause lots of damage in a hurry. And if you're a terrorist and you're wanting to impact the food supply in America, are you going to do something in New York or Chicago? Probably not, right? You could introduce something in a rural area that could impact, the food supply. So that may be an area where conservation officers are uniquely suited. They could also use species to transmit diseases for livestock, causing mass die-offs. Could also transmit to humans, causing pandemics and other human casualties. They could also just introduce species that would outcompete native species and impact industries like commercial fishing. Species could damage hydroelectric plants, cause problems with the power supply. Things like that are all ways that invasive species could be used as an act of terror. So conservation officers get to be very, very familiar with their assigned areas, kind of like a traditional, beat police officer, working the beat, knowing the people, knowing how things are supposed to look, knowing when something's out of place. So same with conservation officers. Familiarity allows them to recognize when something or someone is out of place. So, for example, a conservation officer will drive past a particular farm, and you get to know which trucks are supposed to be there, which trucks are not supposed to be there, what the farmer drives, what the worker drives, and they may be able to notice when a particular truck is there and out of place. Similarly, if like the farmer never parks in the fields and all of a sudden there's a truck parked in the fields or in an area where the farmer not allows somebody to park, the officer would notice that. Now, why would they be at farms? There's a lot of chemicals at farms. There's fertilizer at farms. There's hydrous ammonia at farms. There's a lot of chemicals that could be used in a terror attack that someone may have to try to get in a rural area. So that's where knowing who should be at places and what vehicles are there would be a way that conservation officers would be able to help. They also may come in contact with somebody that's in possession of an illegal invasive species. So the conservation officer may check somebody that appears to be fishing, but they have invasive fish species in the boat that they were getting ready to release, and they could thwart the release of those fish. Conservation officers can also be included in the formal intelligence processes, just like traditional law enforcement officers. They can gather intelligence in rural areas and close the gap that currently exists in intelligence gathering. And because conservation officers are already embedded in these areas and in these communities, it would really cost very little to integrate them into the current Homeland Security practices. Really the only cost would be training and education. So there's another reading in the book, or in the module 2, about the illegal wildlife trade and its relationship to terrorism. And that's another way that conservation officers are involved in Homeland Security as well, is that this illegal wildlife trade is oftentimes used to finance, or can be used to finance terrorist operations. Organized crime groups are involved with the illegal wildlife trade. So just by the nature of their jobs, working illegal wildlife, type of things, they could also become involved in Homeland Security practices there. All right, so I'm gonna stop for this week. Be sure to do your assignments. As always, if you have questions, please do not hesitate to let me know.